Va bene, allora buongiorno a tutti. Io comincio in italiano, però come ho detto i miei studenti stanno seguendo dall'estero, allora volevo, visto che mi è stato chiesto dalla SISFA di far sapere cosa facciamo, dove siamo, con l'idea che io ho questo sogno di ospitare voi in Turchia, lì dove lavoro, sulla costa dove incominciò la scienza occidentale, in particolare dove io vivo è la cittadina che è l'antica Clazomene. Visto che mi vengono fatte domande tipo ma è pericoloso? Allora volevo che sapeste che è perfettamente non pericoloso, non ci sono più pericoli che stare a Roma, o certamente meno che a Los Angeles, dove ho vissuto per molti anni. Questa che vedete qui è davanti a casa mia, questa è l'isola di Clazomene, la Clazomene aristocratica, perché poi la parte democratica se ne tornò a terra, e c'è un passaggio, diciamo, una stradina molto stretta dove per le macchine c'è un ospedale adesso su quell'isola, e quindi i primi occidentali che tornarono in questa zona nel XVIII secolo attraversarono a cavallo prima che ci fosse questa stradina, e l'acqua arrivava fino a più o meno a sopra la parte superiore del petto del cavallo, insomma, quindi questa è la scoperta. Qui forse riuscite a intuire la prua di una nave greca, non so se riuscite a vederla, ma questa è una ricostruzione di un museo che c'è proprio lì, questa specie di sollevamento qui che si chiama tepe in turco, è Liman Tepe, che sembra una contraddizione perché Liman è un porto, questa è la collina del porto, perché ovviamente c'è stato un sollevamento o il mare si è abbassato, quello che sia, comunque il porto era quasù, insomma, all'inizio. Questa è una civiltà contemporanea a Troia, che sarebbe a questo punto a qualche centinaio di chilometri a nord da qui, e non sappiamo quali fossero le comunicazioni tra le due, diciamo. Comunque tutta questa zona è il Golfo di Smirne, e tanto per intenderci, perché mi viene chiesto anche questo, ma le donne come si vestono? Così si vestono, quindi mi è stato chiesto. Allora, se vengono le signore sono libere di stare. La Turchia fabbrica e vende bikini, quindi potete fare come volete sulla spiaggia, insomma. Questi sono il gruppo di laureandi, questo è un altro gruppo di laureandi, abbiamo fatto tesi su CubeSats e vele solari quest'anno, e abbiamo avuto anche un bellissimo workshop con la NASA su free open source software, non so come si traduca in italiano, questo cioè software che è gratuito e open source per disegno di missioni spaziali, insomma. E qui si è venuto poi il console, il signor Valerio Giorgio, sarà belliere di avervi come ospite. Questa è la signora che stava per partorire, ovviamente, ha avuto una bellissima bambina, e vedete il carabiniere con la bandiera italiana, quindi tutto quello di cui vi aspettate lo trovate lì. Questa è una zona che è stata occupata da italiani da 600 anni, insomma, si chiamano i Levantini, proprio vicino al porto che vi ho fatto vedere prima. Qui proprio a 50 metri c'è una cassetta postale che dice Regge Poste Italiane 1856. Più di così non posso fare, quindi vi aspetto e speriamo che...
Quando ci hanno invitato, quando dobbiamo venire?
Questo lo decide il Presidente, adesso che sapete parliamo. And now I need to switch to English. I'm sorry about that, because my students are listening from far away, and too bad, they don't know Italian. So some of them are at the Politecnico di Milano, so they will learn Italian eventually. Okay, so what is the motivation here is that my personal motivation is this. I obviously come from La Sapienza in physics, and then when I went to the United States after a NASA experience, I went into entrepreneurship. I had a California startup company centered on the commercial uses of Casimir forces. So these are forces that appear between two neutral parallel planes. That's typically the archetypal geometry. And the question is, can they be used for technology? And of course that makes the topic so much less pure, which explains why the room is empty. It's simply that it's beautiful to talk about the force between two conductors that are completely uncharged. But when we start to talk about technology, obviously people feel a little bit turned off, so that's a topic that has been less popular, but in reality it's extremely important, because as you know, Feynman talks about these forces as one of the limitations in the speech that he gave in 1959 at Caltech on There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom, explaining that stiction will be a problem in nanotechnology. So the question is, can you just is our relationship to van der Waals and Casimir forces simply one of defending ourselves against the inevitable extinction, or is this something that we can use to do something that could not be done in any other way? So I am still interested in the technological part, so I had several patents in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, in Israel, but I'm also, during the time that I was trying to explain to physicists why this was a legitimate question, I became interested in what happens when technologies develop. I mean, at some point, as also our colleague was describing before, sometimes machinery appears out of nowhere and you don't know why. So is this so unexplained, or is this a common characteristic of emergent technologies? That became my question. So is it possible to take the technologies that are being enabled by Casimir forces and van der Waals forces and somehow characterize them within the context of technologies that are emerging, enabling other technologies? These are called general purpose technologies, like nanotechnology would be an example, for instance. So I made a statement a few years ago when I came here, and I gave a long talk about Casimir forces a few years back, on the concept of dispersion force engineering, which appears by itself to be a heresy, but the idea here is that we can take these forces, dispersion, the word dispersion was given by London to these forces that depend on the spectral properties of molecules. And so van der Waals forces and Casimir forces are the same interaction. Actually, in practice, the community uses those two words interchangeably, although rigorously speaking, van der Waals forces are the unretarded version and the Casimir forces are the retarded version of the force. So what I mean here is that any technology that allows you to control them, is it possible to control dispersion forces? What I mean is, we know that we can control pressure in a locomotive. We can get a train to move by controlling the pressure caused by steam. Is it possible to make engines with these forces? That would be the question. Or something like that. Is it possible to make these forces more or less? Is it possible to make them repulsive? Is it possible to engineer that? That would be the question. So here, there are characteristics for these things that the experts talk about. So there is a definition for an emerging technology, enabling, general purpose, etc. So there is a long literature, but it is a new literature. This is a new field of study, and especially what's new about it is to study technologies that are emerging as a function of time. So my interest here became, yeah, okay, we can argue whether right now the technologies I'm interested in are emerging, enabling, and general purpose. But is it possible that 100 years ago there was something that happened that fits this characteristic and was enabled by these forces? And you could say, well, this is impossible because our physical understanding of dispersion forces comes from more or less Fritz London, so we're talking about 1930, and quantum mechanics. So how is it possible that you can understand it 100 years ago? Well, you don't have to understand it to have an invention based on these forces. This is something actually that is written in patent law. You can come and get a patent for something you don't understand, so long as you can reduce it to practice and enable others to build the same machinery. So here's the thing. So if you go to the lectures, I'm a Feynman everything fan, you will remember from last year. So if you go to the Feynman lectures on physics, you can actually go to this link here. I will not play that for you because there is a huge copyright headache, but the Feynman lectures on physics were recorded, so you can go listen to Feynman talk about this mysterious thing, the Johansson blocks. Now, I don't know how many physicists or engineers have ever heard about that. I hadn't. So, and Feynman here, who you would think, is just with his head somewhere else in Feynman diagrams or whatever, he talks about the Johansson blocks as though these were in his garage. So I personally felt like an idiot, no way. By the way, he talks also in, there's plenty of room at the bottom, he talks about it, the same thing there too, although he misspells it, but it's the same thing. So he was very familiar with these blocks, obviously. And I want to just see if the game, oops, no, it didn't play. So here we go. So I just will try to play here a video. I don't even know who holds the copyright, but it's on YouTube. And my Swedish is very bad. But I will show you what this presentation is about. I'm going to drag this on to 5. And the link is down there if you want to look at it yourselves. And here we go. So here we have what I want to show you.
Ingen annan har tidigare lyckats tillverka mätinstrument med sådan precision. Bitar med skillnader på endast en tiondel av ett hårstrås tjocklek. Han blir av sin nyblivna hustrus symaskin, eftersom diversfaktoriets maskiner är för grova.
Did you see what he sat down at? Did you see what he's using? I'm going to rewind it for you because it happens very fast. I'm going to put you back here. Look at that carefully.
Han blir av sin...
What is that? Oops, sorry. Back. Let me go back to that. This is not friendly, but I'm going to try again. Okay. So I'm not going to stop it because clearly it's problematic if I stop it. So, but just try to see what he's sitting out at.
Hemma i Eskilstuna börjar han sitt arbete.
What is that?
Ingen annan har tidigare lyckats tillverka mätinstrument med sådan precision.
You have never seen this machine in your life? Oh.
En tiondel av ett hårstrås tjocklek. Han blir av sin nyblivna hustrus symaskin, eftersom divers.
Exactly. I'm going to stop here. So that's the thing. So this is a Singer sewing machine that Mr. Johansson hijacked from his wife Margareta, or Greta, shortly after being married. And he made it into a lathe that basically allowed him to make these blocks with incredible optical accuracy. So the story of the Johansson blocks that Feynman talks about is that independent of Casimir forces, what he was thinking is he was a rifle maker. He was making guns, in particular the Mauser rifle, under license from Germany. And if you want to make a gun at the beginning of the 20th century, end of the 19th century, there are literally thousands of gauges in the shop to make sure that everything is done to tolerance. So Johansson, who was fundamentally a cabinet maker in Sweden, in Eskilstuna, in Sweden, had this idea to say, if I can make 103 blocks that are very accurate, by combining these, I can make 200,000 combinations of all different lengths. So that's what he patented in 1896. It just happened 2 years later, the two of these blocks that have been rung, is the English for this term, W-R-U-N-G, so they got, there is a way to do it, I'll show you now. So you do this, the Feynman talks about this, and I could, as a student, I wouldn't understand that at all, but they got stuck, basically, and you leave them there for a while, you come back there a week later, you can't pull them apart. And these things fell to the ground and couldn't be separated. And at that point, you know, there was the eureka moment for Johansson, who understood that not only did he have a strategy for these blocks to be very super accurate gauges, but by simply attaching them with this magic movement, they could actually produce a new solid object that you couldn't even pull apart. Okay? So this was not coming from physics, you see, this was coming from the shop of a cabinet maker. And so, just to be clear, for those of you who do know, obviously these forces were well known from before. Okay, so here we had the famous experiment by Robert Boyle, in which, for philosophical reasons, this was the Huxley-Boyle fight, in which Boyle basically polished two discs of marble and just drops a string connected to one of these discs, and there is another disc at the bottom of the jar, and just by touching it, he's able to lift it. Now the problem is that Boyle didn't want that. For his own plenum versus vacuum philosophy that they were fighting about, what Boyle wanted desperately was that upon sucking up the air, the bottom disc should have fallen off, and it never did. So you see here, it's kind of comical, you see this little weight hanging at the bottom of the thing. That's, Boyle justifies the little weight as to help the bottom disc fall off. because he really didn't want to. He will not do it. You know, that's the problem. But of course, this is marble. This is not metal, the way that he was doing, that Johansson did. There is here a long thing that, of course, you can't read, but this is a description by Tyndall in 1875 of the Whitworth plates, metal plates, that for the first time were reported to stick together. I mean, they could have put a person under one of these plates and they wouldn't come off. So at that point, of course, I know what everybody's thinking. Okay, this is a vacuum, right? It's, you suck out the air and this is going to happen. But in reality, Tyndall was the one who demonstrated that that's not the case, because the force to separate them is larger than the atmospheric pressure. So it can't be that. So here's our protagonist, and I'm going to start speeding up. But as you can see, you know, he was a man of weaponry, basically. There were three industries at the time that were high accuracy industry. One was the gun industry, the second one was sewing machines, and the third one, of course, was watches. So these are the things that you would have done if you wanted to be accurate. This kind of summarizes, you know, a lot of his biography here. That's the famous Singer sewing machine. This is the same identical thing that my mother had. I remember my mother, all there, she was a seamstress, you know, so she was there working all the time. But my father never did this to her, you know, so that wasn't modified like that. So this is his family, and this is him when he was a rifle inspector, and we even have rifles in the receiver. Here you can see CJ. And this is a comparator to make sure of the accuracy, which was absolutely unheard of before him. So these Joe blocks that were, you know, of course, coming from Sweden, became the technology that, I'm going to skip the movie again, but this became the conversation of the day. So at the International Bureau in Paris, Professor Benoit said, "This is pure magic and nonsense. You gentlemen don't know what you're talking about." They couldn't believe it. They couldn't believe it that these things would be so accurate. And they couldn't believe that they would stick together without being magnetic or charged or some glue or whatever. You know, so this is magic and nonsense. You know, that's about the characteristics of an emerging technology, obviously. So he applied for a patent and was denied by Sweden, but promptly accepted in the UK. And you can see here the explosive growth of this technology in Europe and in the rest of the world. Everybody understood what they were witnessing. They were witnessing a technology that actually, the first time that Johansson was making these, he was using Brown and Sharp micrometers to calibrate his cubes. Later on, the Brown and Sharp micrometers were being calibrated with his gauges, you know. So it was a complete reversal of fortune. So you can see here from these statements that, you know, the explosive progress of this technology. And here, with some exaggeration perhaps, but it's said that Johansson's gauge blocks won the First World War. Now maybe that's an exaggeration, but certainly he sold them to everybody, friend and foe, no problem. So everybody matured. So here you can see some kind of a provocative picture. This is here, they had the same picture in kilograms and in pounds, with 100 pounds for the Americans. And over here, up here, you got two of these blocks that are literally the size of, you know, half a finger. And here you got 100 kilograms hanging from them. That's pretty remarkable. You know, this is not imaginary. This is really what they could do with them. So Rotto, Higgs, and Martin have developed a proposed strategy to identify technological emergence. We've seen some of these things so far: radical novelty, relatively fast growth. Coherence means that there is a common language that's developed by those who are in the know about the technology. Prominent impact, well, very literal in this case, because they were making guns. And uncertainty and ambiguity, it's magic. So we got everything that I personally believe identifies the dispersion force engineering as applied to this case as a technological emergence. They rapidly went into industry. So there was one thing that he was doing wrong, because wherever he went solo, he went bankrupt. So his companies always failed, both in Sweden and in America. However, he was lucky because people saw the value in that. So in Sweden, he was able to sell his stock to a bank, move to the United States, open an office in New York with a manufacturing plant in Poughkeepsie. I don't know if you've been to Poughkeepsie, that's where Vassar College is. It's a lovely town, very green in the summer and awfully cold in the winter, which must have been good for a Swede, I guess. And he went bankrupt there as well. So at that point, he was looking for help. And who was in the position to want everything that he was making? And you can see from here who helped him out, Henry Ford. You know, Henry Ford, of course, was just starting to make the Model T, the Model A car. He was discontinuing the Model T, and so he needed to have complete interchangeability of parts at very high degrees of accuracy. So he grabbed Johansson, he gave him an entire wing of a building, and it is said that if this is to be believed, that the only people that were allowed to enter Henry Ford's office without knocking were his son and Johansson. That's as important as this man became. By the way, you may wonder, you know, where were the physicists in all this? Well, Johansson actually is responsible for the official change rate of the inch to centimeter, 25.4, which is actually the average of what the British and the Americans were doing at the time. And also he introduced the 20 degrees Celsius as the temperature at which everything should be calibrated as the official temperature in the laboratory, which people didn't like because 20 degrees is too cold for many Europeans, I guess. So again, skipping, because I think that my time is coming to an end, talking about the future here. Actually, you know, maybe if I have another minute, let me show you the magic, right? You may want to see the magic, because that's cool to see if I can. Okay, here we go. So let me show you in the hands of Johansson how you ring these blocks. Because Feynman talks about it, but doesn't show it in class. And by the way, there are the pictures of Feynman that day talking, but there are no Johansson's blocks on his table, so I don't think that he took it to class. So I'm going to go back here, drag it over, and not stop this time.
Med motsatsen i ett omsorgsfullt utarbetat träigt videogram vandrar han till Emergence, Attas verkstäder och utför demonstrationer inför häpna direktörer, ingenjörer och verkstadsmästare.
Now look at him. You see?
Ett trolleri.
He's ringing. And that's what Feynman is talking about. You can't separate it now. You see now he's building
Två
up.
bitar läggs försiktigt i kors mot varandra. Och genom glidande och skruvande rörelser fram och tillbaka eftersom samman. De sammanhäftade bitarna bildar ett ämne.
Magic.
Det är precisionen i stålytans behandling som gör dessa två bitar odelbara. Också små skillnader i stålets temperatur påverkar mätaren.
I wanted to conclude. I think that I know we're very time. Okay. So this is a slide that I showed when I spoke about cosmic forces the last time, and it's the same thing. The only thing is that now the question is, we are in the 21st century. What has happened to these Johansson blocks? First of all, you can still buy them today. In Italy, there are companies that make Johansson blocks. They make them in China, in India, in Sweden, in America, everywhere. So this is still the gauge that people use, but I didn't even know at all about it. I had to look at it in the internet. But now what they've done at Stanford, they have made, if you've seen Mission Impossible, you know the movie, okay, so the one in Dubai. So now they've done they replicated, if you want, the paws of the gecko lizard that had 6 million setae under each paw. And because they are so fine, you can establish a solid connection to any substratum, basically. And so that's been done, of course, with nanotechnology now. And so this student, who actually became a professor afterwards, is venturing up the building at Stanford there, and unlike the movie, there are no batteries. So you will never discharge, and this is just the care or the uncertainty principle of quantum electrodynamics applied to the electromagnetic field. So the question that I am investigating now is, let's assume that of course I will follow up with my write-up, but let's assume that all the evidence points to the fact that the dispersion force engineering applied to the Johansson blocks was in fact emergent, enabling general purpose technology, what's going to happen in the future? So now, I was personally at JPL working there when there was incredible skepticism that the Casimir force would have any application in space. Now JPL is funding this research. Because the reason, and it was just magic and they didn't want to talk about it, just say, just the same reaction. But of course now you understand, when you're in space and you've got two satellites that are getting close to each other, really you would like sometimes, or astronauts, you would like to have something like that, because it's very dangerous in space to lose a grip of the spacecraft, you know. So there is a tremendous amount of experimentation that is going on in the space station with stuff like this. And also there are other technologies in which nanotubes attract each other by means of the van der Waals force. So I actually have seen the NRAM that is in a permanent memory element. It doesn't use transistors, basically. So if the two nanotubes are touching, then it's a 1. If they're separated electrostatically, then it's a 0. So it's a new and entirely new type of computer, basically based entirely on van der Waals forces. So my research is about finding tracers in the marketplace of products that are enabled in this sense by dispersion force engineering. But I think it's pretty cute that the first example comes from a time that we didn't even know why these things were attracting each other. And so thank you so much for your attention.
Grazie, molto interessante. Se abbiamo delle domande in sala? Allora, io ho seguito con grande interesse, sono un fisico, quindi mi occupo anche di cose tra le altre cose, quindi ho trovato molto interessante. Non conoscevo la parte storica, che è senz'altro, mi ricordavo la citazione di Feynman. E effettivamente quando uno ha a che fare con oggetti a dimensione ridotta, ad esempio 2D, e su scale molto piccole, il problema del friction in generale è un problema importante. Soprattutto, diciamo, il tipico approccio che uno ha alla friction, che è l'attrito viscoso, nei fluidi, quando uno arriva a livello nano, diciamo, diventa tutta una piccola. Quindi è senz'altro un campo molto interessante. Dal punto di vista fisico penso che molte cose sono note, ma sicuramente dal punto di vista tecnologico e dell'applicabilità per prodotti e tecnologie c'è ancora tantissimo.
Se posso rispondere a questa domanda, lei può ancora andare oggi nei testi e ti danno molte volte, è un mistero perché questi blocchi si attraggono. Feynman immediatamente lo attribuisce alle forze intermolecolari, però ci sono 3 possibilità: o la pressione atmosferica, o la tensione del liquido, perché c'è un film di 25 nanometri di olio in pratica, e poi le forze intermolecolari. Quanto a ognuno di queste 3 componenti si deve attribuire questa la pressione totale, quello è sempre una questione che viene ricercata, insomma. Però non è vero che sia un mistero completo, invece alcuni libri ne parlano ancora come se non sappiamo.
No, io dico, tra gli specialisti che si occupano di queste cose, sulla friction,
ma infatti Feynman
c'è una certa conoscenza.
Feynman non ha dubbi, ovviamente, il fisico non ha dubbi.
Esatto.
È interessante infatti questo che dice.
Molto interessante, grazie. Veramente bene.